Welcome back. Today's episode, we have Texas Tyler joining us for a playoff preview. What's going on, Tyler?
Hey, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Good. I'm excited for this matchup, man. There's going to be a lot of really good matchups for this playoffs. I think it's a really loaded group, especially with these extra wild card spots. I think makes it a lot more fun. There's a lot of good teams in both divisions, and should be a lot of good matchups here. So we want to start us off by going over the top seeds in the AL. We'll maybe spend a little bit of time on the division winners that got the buys here, the Boston Red Sox and Los Angeles Angels, 96 and 106 win team. What do you think about their squads and their chances here?
Yeah, no, I mean, Boston. It's the same story year after year. They're the best team in the AL again. Um, just insanely deep, both on the pitching side of things as well as offensively. It it's less comfortable. Only 7 games they won the division by this year, and well off their win total a year ago, but still. Um, so good, just across the board at everything. They don't have you can't really find an issue with them anywhere. So gotta think Boston remains the favorite, as they have been basically every year of TLG so far.
Yeah, that's a really nasty squad. I think the Chris Sale injury hurts quite a bit. That's a really top-notch pitcher to be down for a couple of weeks.
Hmm.
So that is one big weak spot. It's a couple relievers injured too. They have some really good relievers on the IL here, and Medina and Skibinski, a couple of young studs who should be in that bullpen for a long time for them. But they're the one team that can handle a couple injuries like that because they're just so deep, like you said. That roster is pretty much the same position players wise as it has been years past. You got the same outfield in Carroll, Bogan, and Robles, and you got Angelton and back with Adames in the middle of the field there for like the 8th year in a row, and then 6th year in a row or something like that. And then you got Devers and Lux combination. So yeah, it's just a weapon offense full of weapons there, and no real big weak spot like you said. If you look at their stats, pretty much top two in every single category, pitching and hitting. The only thing they're not is they do strike out a decent amount, but that's just going to happen when you have a ton of power like that. Team that's third in home runs and high in slugging percentage are going to strike out a little bit more than some of those weaker contact teams. Third in hits, so they're not like the ridiculous dominant offense that they were in the last couple of years at like 38 WAR. Still first place in overall position player WAR, but they are second in a couple categories here. But yeah, still just with the pitching, man, it makes them really tough to beat. Crazy 43 zone range too, thanks to Adames and Carroll and the wizard there in the middle of the field. Angelton, just such an elite triangle of the three most important defensive spots there. So really nasty team. In LA, what do you think of season they had? I was pretty surprised by the 96 wins.
Yeah, no, I think back to when we did our AL previews. I think said the Angels were going to finish in fourth in the AL West. So just miles off on them. You look at their season results, and there's a bit of, they were a little bit fortunate in terms of luck and in close games and stuff, but it's still a really talented team. Very, small ball esque. Another team that plays good defense, has really good starting pitching. Actually, led the AL and starters ERA this year. They steal a ton of bases. They led the AL in stolen bases as well. So, they got 2 guys in Crum and Julio Rodriguez who fell just short of 40 home runs. So there is power in the lineup too. It's a really good team. Bruno's obviously an ace. The pitching's good behind it. The bullpen struggled this year, but they made a lot of moves, getting Klaus and promoting Wingerter, 2 guys who really helped their bullpen a ton. And Bowden's obviously great at the backside. So a team that probably will excel a little more in the closer, lower scoring games where they can let their defense and pitching do the work, but a really talented bunch and a good season from them.
Yeah, that's a good breakdown. I was thinking about some of the ratings there while you're talking. Pretty interesting season they had. Started 7-0. They had that one weird month in July where they were 8-16, but pretty much every other month they were really good. Just a really middle of the pack offense here. Like at a bunch of stuff, not middle of the pack, just a tad above, but only 8th in batting average. But they were 4th in overall WAR, about 10 WAR behind Boston overall. But the pitching just when you're first in starters ERA, that just means you're just gonna be in every single game. Like a 3.9 starters ERA, I would dream for that. Really, really, really nasty. Second in hits allowed. So just if you're going in the playoffs with a 3-man rotation, probably a 4-man rotation, but their top three there that they got listed right now, Bruno, McCullers, and Sanchez, pretty nasty. McCullers was a big pickup from them, coming over from division rival of yourself last year. He had
Mhm.
not quite the year he had last year. His ratings did go down a little bit with his old age. I think he lost a little bit of stuff and control both at the end of the year there. Stamina went down a little bit, so he is aging a little bit, but still a really solid pitcher. Has that high movement. Guys only hit 212 off him, so solid option there. But like you said, Bruno is a pretty clear ace there, just an absolute freak. Led the league in BAPIP against. So there's a couple guys that induce from pretty weak contact there. And then you got Sixto Sanchez, pretty solid, number 3 to 4 pitcher. So if you're matching up, that's the one thing we'll get to in a few seconds here when we talk about Baltimore and Oakland and Boston. The as good as those pitchers are, McCullers, Bruno are pretty solid. Those teams probably have a little bit of advantage though, because those other teams have such elite starting pitching. So if there's one thing that the Angels, even though they're first in stars ERA, which is funny to say, you wouldn't think that's like a weakness in the playoffs, but they don't, like, other than Bruno, they don't have that like superstar ratings pitcher. So when you match up with, you get the top three and all those teams I just mentioned, they're just so nasty. So it'll be interesting matchups playoff wise. Offensively, they're just, yeah. A couple of their best guys actually underperformed too, which is interesting. Like Marcelo Meyer is probably a lot better than what his stats showed this year. His OPS plus went from 116 to 94 from last year to this. So I wouldn't be surprised if he hit a little better in the playoffs here than he did in the regular season. Defensively, they're so nasty too. Got that high
Yeah.
range center fielder, high range shortstop, high range second baseman, really athletic catcher. So I love, just love how that team's put together defensively. All right, next up, let's talk about the wild card. So this is where it gets really fun. Oh no, sorry. I guess we'll talk about Cleveland first, maybe. Might as well go with the division winners, and then we'll talk about the wild card. So the Cleveland Guardians. That's another exciting one too, though. 87 wins. Really, really cool. Did probably no one expected them to win 87 games in the league. Like we talked about in the preview. We did expect them to be quite a bit better. Love the moves they've been making over the last year and a half. But that's even outperforming what I thought they would be. Really, really exciting ball club. What do you think about their young club?
Yeah, it was. The AL Central was not its strongest this year, so 87 wins is enough to get it done. But and also, like you said, it was a team we were liking a lot coming into the season as being a fun, maybe hang around a little above 500 team this year, and they definitely were that. They actually had a bad month of the season, but were bad last month, but were doing really well before then. It's you look at the team stats and there's really nothing that stands out in terms of what they excelled at outside of hitting a lot of home runs. Second AL in home runs, fourth in extra base hits, fourth in slugging percentage as well. So it's a team that can hit the ball, and it's not really any. I think their highest home run output was 33 with Bianco and Bishop. A lot of guys hit 20 plus. I think there's seven, maybe eight that hit 20 plus. So it's just a deep power lineup. A lot of guys can hit the ball really well, and then in a small series, that's scary if those bats get hot.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting with the home runs. I never noticed that. That's a lot of dudes, double digits. Holy smokes! What an impressive year. Looking at the Batty there. Batty was the one guy that just had a really, really nasty year. That first baseman gives you really good at bats.
Hmm.
65 power there with that 28 home runs. So yeah, it's just interesting. Probably outperformed a little bit, but it's not like they got super lucky at anything specifically. Like one run games 20 and 18. Really balanced against lefty and righties, almost the exact same win percentage. The home and away, everyone's about the same skew there. So really, 4 games above the Pythagorean. Like, it's just really interesting. It kind of got weak down the stretch there, 9-15. But yeah, really, really decent team all around. Got a couple of young stars. I'm really excited to see what this core of Bianco and Rattray and those guys do in the future. But yeah, this year I think obviously they're not quite as high end as some of those other teams. But small playoff sample sizes, they could definitely get lucky and win a game or two against some top teams here in the playoffs. They definitely have the weapons to do it. Love Eddie Billings, man. Like, he's as good as any pitcher in
Hmm.
baseball. Once you get in the playoffs, you got a guy like him. For WAR, there's such elite stuff and movement. That guy can duel with the best of them, man. And Corbin Burns, you got the veteran leadership there. So definitely have a shot there for sure. All right, next up, the wild card. So here we go. 99 win Baltimore. That's one of the higher wild card win totals you'll ever see in a really tough race with Boston. It's gonna hard to outduel them, but yeah, they get in the playoffs there with 99 wins. What an extraordinary year for Baltimore. If you look at their team, they just have really high level stats at almost every position. Batting average is third, earned run average is third. If you're top three in both hitting and pitching, that's pretty nasty there. They got a really impressive rotation. That's about as good as any top three in baseball with Spar, Rocker, and Crispin. That's a tough team to play against.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's either them or Houston, but they were both, I think, by far the best two teams in the AL in the second half. And that's to be, expected with a team like Baltimore, who is very young. I think, when we get into awards, we'll probably see, the season Jim Spar had is just so insanely good. And might be the pitcher that teams would want to face the least in the playoffs. Just especially in Baltimore, where his ground ball profile plays so well in a stadium that just gives up homers like crazy. But you got that top three on the pitching side, a guy who's an MVP candidate now, Adley Rutschman on the offensive side, along with a number of dudes. It's a scary team and one that I would not want to play at all.
Yeah, that's so full of stars, man. That's crazy how far we've come. You think about so exciting for Boston, man, making the playoffs for the first time. You think about the original teams. Remember back in 2020, they'd play the Yankees and lose 25-3 multiple times a year.
Yep.
Let up like 7-9 home runs. I remember their pitching rotation at one point was so bad that I don't think they had a single pitcher in like 20 or 21 that would have been on my top 13. Like their entire rotation was like waiver wire type talents. They just had no money and a couple bad contracts. Chris Davis, and that was Baltimore Brian being patient, same GM, and just stuck with it. And he drafted a couple pitchers really high there. Got Rocker first overall, I think, and then took Dylan Lesko, who's one of the best relief prospects in baseball now. Didn't quite live up to the starter profile, but looks like an elite closer coming up there next year probably. And then he got a huge progression from Crispin and just really built that team. And it's really cool. And then kept Adley around. And now all of a sudden he started adding some nice role player pieces around those stars. Kai Boom was one of my favorite pickups from the trade deadline. He had 1.2 WAR since the deadline there and had a really nice run down the stretch. And then that Figueroa guy. And then all of a sudden you pick up a couple pieces. And now they're just looking scary. Pretty much the only position I'd say they're not super strong at would be corner outfield, but they're still decent. Like I love that season Rocky Laundrie had 65 range right fielder, kind of like a center fielder there. And then you got the left fielder Kirby, had a pretty good year, 2.6 WAR. But really, other than that, in first base, they're just really strong everywhere. And the bullpen is actually decent. I love that pickup of Drew Rasmussen, and he had a killer season in Detroit. Didn't play quite as well when he moved over to the tougher stadium. He did have low adaptability, though, so maybe now that he's adapted for a couple months, he'll play a little better in the playoffs. But just a really, really nasty team full of stars, and I really can't wait to see them compete with the veterans, and they get to play like Boston or a couple of those teams later on. I think they really do have the star power to be able to compete. And if you're playing Rocker, Crispin, and Spar, man, those guys, just deadly. You're not going to get outpitched too often with those three guys for sure.
Mm-mm.
All right, next up we have the Houston Astros at 95 wins as the next highest seed in the wild card. 99 and 95 win wild card team. That's just crazy. This league is just loaded in the playoffs with talent. So obviously this team, first thing that jumps out is just the what was the nickname that Brian came up with there for those two guys, Pena and Bellinger? I think it was the Crush Brothers.
CNC Factory or something. CNC something Factory, yeah.
We'll have to get that to stick or whatever. But yeah, those guys were the most dynamic duo possibly in the history of baseball. Home runs wise, they overtook the legend Mantle and Maris, 61 Yankees. They had 119 combined home runs. Both guys fall just short of 60. Absolutely disgusting. I can't imagine if that happened in real life, how exciting that would have been. Both guys just mashing like that. I was a Jays fan when they had Edward Encarnacion. No, I still am, but and Jose Batista both having like 45, 50 a year a couple years ago there in like 2015 and stuff, and that was so exciting. It was just having those guys hit like 3 and 4 in the lineup, and just having the ability to watch all those plate appearances back to back, just see such elite hitters. And this guy, these guys are on even another level than that. Like they're almost at 60 home runs and way higher batting averages. So it would just be so incredible. It'd be kind of like watching Trout and Ohtani, two superstars in LA in real life, just on the same team. So that was super exciting. And then the rest of the lineup, we had a couple guys really play well, like Danny Seymour and Ed Howard bounced back from his injury last year and was one of the better shortstops in the AL this year. They got a lot of talent, man, like Kyber Ruiz. And so you're saying like their fifth, sixth best players, like, 3, 4 WAR guys. So really, really impressive hitters. The big question mark with them is this pitching good enough to win the World Series? The pitching is definitely not on the level, talent-wise, of some of those other teams we just talked about, Boston and Baltimore especially. Maybe not quite as good as Cleveland, maybe pretty close there, but that's going to be the big question mark, I would say.
Yeah, no, I mean it's crazy. If the playoff series end up being what I think they should be, and it's the first round of them in Baltimore, who were the two hottest teams in the second half, and just that pitching against that offense is it's just such a exciting matchup to think about. So I would love that if that comes to fruition. The pitching, it feels kind of like the Angels, where Maxwell, like Bruno, for them is a bona fide ace to me, and he's really good. And then the questions just kind of lie behind him. So Maxwell and like Bruno, he's a guy who could probably win you 2 games in a 5-game series. It's just about figuring out that other one, and if those bats can play up to that. But it's just such an insane offense. Almost 300 combined RBI between Pena and Bellinger. It's crazy. But very excited to see how those bats play in the postseason. Good to have the Astros back in the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, 1,500 total hits, 280 home runs, led the league in on base and slugging and WOBA and run score. That's just insane. Almost 1,000 runs. Actually had more runs than Boston. So they had 946. And then Boston had 892. So they had almost 60 more, 55, something like that, more runs than Boston at second place. That's just outrageous. What an incredible offense. I'd have to Google that after and see where that ranks all time. Can't imagine too many teams in baseball have ever had 1,000 runs. That's just an incredible offense. Especially not in the last like 20, 30 years, and batting average is going down quite a bit. But anyways, really, really impressive. And as you were saying that, I was like, you know what, the pitching's not that bad. Luis Castillo is actually pretty nasty. I really like his profile, and I guess Tracy, maybe the young gun, can live up to it. So maybe that will give him a nice enough number 3, 4 to be able to compete. But yeah, definitely going to be a really exciting matchup. You get to see them versus Baltimore, like you said. You see Rocker and Spar versus those hitters. Holy smokes, that's what you pay for. So next up we have, this is a really interesting point here. Oakland A's sneak into the playoffs 1 game ahead of Toronto. Heartbreaking finale for Toronto down the stretch. They're losing 5 in a row. We'll get to that more in a second. Let's talk about Oakland. Cup half full thing first. The team that did make it in, the Oakland A's, really exciting. Just like Baltimore, they weren't quite as bad at the start. They had a little bit of talent, but they're just playing such a tough division. Houston, you have had such good years, couple 100-win years and stuff, and Houston's been consistent all the way through. The Angel been pretty good, so it's been really tough sledding for Oakland. Really cool to see Ray there. He's been there for quite a while now to be able to get in. Team that he really built up, really homegrown there. They signed a couple free agents, but a lot of guys, Urbina, Pittman, Hartman, all came up through the system since they're pretty young there. Really, really cool. You know them pretty well, playing against them over 20 times a year. What can you tell me about Oakland's playoff aspirations?
Yeah, maybe the most. I feel like they beat the crap out of me this season, and it's so frustrating because it's not a lot of it's really not any, compared to all these other teams. There's really no star power about them. I mean, 12th in runs scored in the AL, so they're not getting things done offensively. The duo of Pittman and Hartman is really, really good at the top. One of the better duos we had probably in the playoffs. Both of them, yeah, Pittman 4.5 WAR, Hartman just over 5 this season. The closer, Jeremy Mahrez, was really good this year as well. ERA in the ones, saved 36 games for them. So they're going to have to get by on their pitching. And if the offense can just do enough, they do a good job of putting the ball in play where they're fifth in batting average. So put some pressure on some defenses and score enough runs. I think the pitching can try to limit some of these teams to some lower scoring outputs. But it'll be interesting. Them and them in Cleveland will be an interesting season, kind of interesting matchup, and kind of exact opposite of what I expect in the Astros and Orioles series.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't realize the hitting was so weak. That's to win 91 games with a team that finished 10th in OBS is just really interesting. It just shows how good those pitchers are. Looking at one-run games, that really stands out to me. 28 and 15. So that's obviously the main reason. They were almost 65 win percentage there in one-run games. So that's some pretty impressive score. I know the pitching and defense teams are always a little better in those close games, so it's not all luck, coin toss stuff. I noticed that with the teams with the heavy offenses are usually below the Pythagoreans. If you look here, 7 above the Pythagorean. That's pretty crazy. What a cool year for Oakland, and just super exciting. They're just gonna love that playoff revenue. Like nothing, no better feeling in the world than being a low budget team with weak fan sport and being able to get in those playoff games and just make a ton of cash. So really, really cool to help them build their budget up a little bit and make them even more competitive next few years. But yeah, really, really impressive 90-win season with them with that low budget. I'm looking now. Their budget was only 115 million payroll this year, so really, really cool squad for sure. So next up, we'll talk about Toronto for a second here. Toronto was such a good team this year, and it's kind of like me, both finishing one game out of the playoffs. Just a heartbreaking finish for them, especially losing 5 in a row to end off the year against Baltimore and Boston. Really, really tough final sim, like I mentioned in that playoff preview when I did the last episode. That's such a hard finish, and that's what happened. They beat Boston twice, so it looked all good. And then they had a rain out, and then they had to play back-to-back against Boston, lost them both. And then all they would have had to do is win one against Baltimore to tie Oakland, and lost all 3. Just a really, really sad way to finish the year and heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's that Toronto team is so good. There you see just kind of compared with Oakland, who we just touched on, who they lose out to in a game.
Yeah.
Toronto's third in runs scored and third in runs against. That's a tough finish because that's a really talented team that would have been scary in the playoffs.
Yeah, second in earned run average on pitching wise, and then third in overall hitting WAR. So yeah, it's just such a monster season there, and it's just a really tough division with Baltimore and Boston. So it's even harder. So if you win 90 games in division with those two teams, it's like if they could have won maybe 95 in the Central or something, I would have to play those guys 40 times. Who knows, right? So really, really too bad, but. I guess Oakland definitely deserved it. It's just you can't have everybody in the playoffs, unfortunately. Not like March Madness.
Yeah, Toronto makes it in 2025. They make the playoffs at 89 wins. Last year they make it at 91, and then this year at 90 they can't make it. So they've been right around that same number. Just didn't. And this was probably their best team of the 3, crazy enough, and it just did the run luck didn't fall in their favor.
Oh yeah, as soon as you said that, I looked it up. I kind of forgot they made the playoffs back-to-back years. Their Pythagorean this year was 8 higher than it's been the last 2 years, like you said, that they made the playoffs. So not only did they have more wins, the Pythagorean was even higher actually. So 97 Pythagorean this year, and then they only won 90 and then missed it in the playoffs. So just crazy. The pitching was so much better this year than it's been the years past. So, anyways, enough about them. They're not even in the playoffs. That was a pretty fun preview. Clearly, like you said, Boston's probably the favorites, but there's a lot of really good teams. And even the teams with the lower win records have a couple. If you have a star ace, so even if you're like an 85-win team, if you have an ace that can go a couple times in a series, like you talked about with Maxwell, and obviously those Guardians have a couple of really good pitchers there, and Billings and those guys, Tanner Witt and all that you have a chance to beat teams that are a little bit better than you. So that's just going to be a really competitive, really fun playoffs for sure. I guess that's enough with the AL. We'll jump over to the NL. This is also really, really loaded playoffs, really balanced this year. I think the AL is a lot better than they've been years past. The NL is also obviously really strong. It's been a really, really strong, especially the East and the West divisions. This year, we had Atlanta Braves win 102. This team was pretty amazing this year. They had their owner die late in the year, which was really sad. Probably one of the best years they've had in a long time. And the owner croaks right before the playoffs. Can't see if his team wins the championship. But what do you think about this awesome Atlanta season?
Yeah, you probably know him better than I, but it was really cool to see a career resurgence for Freddie Freeman at 38 or 37 for most of the season after he
Jeez.
looked like he could have been dead after a year ago, where he basically couldn't hit the ball. So, we talk about the Pena and Bellinger duo, and it's not that, but Freeman and Acuna in the middle of that order basically they lead the NL in batting war. It's such a good offensive team where, nearly 900 runs on the season. They can hit up and down the lineup. So that's what's going to drive a lot of them. On the pitching side, it's a good, very veteran top three with Pearson, Soroka, and Gallen. So those are guys who can win games. None of which, Pearson, I think still I would consider an ace. The other two are good, solid options behind him. And then the bullpen has some guys too. They call it this Pat Pedretti guy this season, who's just been a monster as a reliever. .33 ERA in his 27 innings since his promotion. So that's a good add for a pitching staff that's kind of middle of the road, a little bit better than, but pretty middle of the road. So it's a really good squad that's going to get by basically on how Freeman and Acuna do.
Yeah, that's pretty funny about Pedretti, the guy you just mentioned. I was looking at stats when you're talking about him there. Starts the season in High A, and then finishes the season as the closer on a 96 win team, or sorry, 102 win team. So that's pretty amazing. What a crazy .33 ERA. That's just outrageous. Absolutely loaded team. And then what we hadn't mentioned yet is Cole is coming back from injury in 1 week. So they
Mm-hmm.
have those pitchers plus Garrett Cole. Probably missed this first round, but I know it doesn't start for 3 or 4 days. But so I don't know if they'll have another sim, and then he might be able to put him back in for the game 6 or 7 or something there. But yeah, pretty nasty, nasty pitching rotation once you add Cole back there. Even without him, they're still as good as anybody, I'd say. Pearson, Soroka, and Gallen. So it's really, really, really tough team. No big weakness, like you mentioned. They're just good at pitching, good at hitting. Just really, really stellar season out of the guy that made a huge difference this year was the catcher Danny Jansen, the center fielder rookie Ben Jackson, both big new additions. Monster seasons out of them, so it really helped. Mauricio trade looked really good for them now, trading for a 5 WAR second baseman. So some really, really good
Yep.
moves in the offseason by Danny there. Definitely earned that division win. Smoked me by about 10 games or more than 10 games. So just a really, really, really awesome team. Next up, we have maybe the best team in baseball right now. This is probably the first time in about 4 years that someone's probably been almost, if not as good as the Boston Red Sox. I know, like they haven't won every single year. I kind of upset them, but from a talent standpoint and a production standpoint, like Boston been kind of head and shoulders above everybody. This is probably the first time that's not the case. I think St. Louis is probably just as good as Boston, or just about. This team is loaded. Um, there's a lot of different players you could talk about in this team, but definitely the pitching stands out to me. What do you think about their overall squad?
Yeah, no, it's such a good team, and I think they're pretty clearly the class of the NL for sure. The pitching is just so insanely good. Both the starters, but the bullpen as well is insane. You know, the Jose Vasquez has just a ridiculous season for them, and he's kind of like a soft tosser and playing into a pretty good defensive team. But guys like Tony Losi and Cedillo are both so good as well. So it's a rotation where runs are not going to be easy to come by, and then it's not going to get any easier once you get to the pen. The offense features, for my money, the MVP and Robert Puason, who, not to toot my own horn too much, but did pick preseason as the MVP. So I'll
Nice.
take that one. But the good thing about having they're not going to hit for a great average, but they have a ton of power up and down the lineup. Miranda and Puason get to 40, Green and McAfee both over 30, others in the 20s. So, not guys who are going to be on base a ton, but they hit for power, and that's a thing that's very scary in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's about as powerful as any lineup gets. They have four blue 70 power tools in their lineup and a couple 60s. Just ridiculous, absolute ridiculous power. You really, really, really have to have movement against him, or you just hooped, and you're going to let like 1 or 2 home runs every single game. I was just looking now. C.J. Abrams had such a nice year for them. I didn't realize how well he played. He had about the same WAR this season as he had the last 3 years combined, pretty close to it.
Mm.
Just an incredible, incredible season out of him. Had a 123 OPS plus, stole a ton of bases, hit over 20 home runs. So really awesome performance there. Just a nasty team. You pretty much covered it all. The last thing I'll mention is just kind of their season stats. Like if you look at it, their Pythagorean was just as good as their win total. They even actually had 108 Pythagorean, so it really were that good of a team. Though what they really just destroyed right-handed pitchers there. 83-41 record versus them.
Yeah.
And then they started the year. The only month they were even close to 500 really was April. Other than that first, 5-1 in the first month. So every other month they were just killer, over 64 win percentage, just ridiculous, so consistent. Like 9, 6, 8, and 8 losses last 4 years, single digits. Last 4 months. I mean, so it's incredible. I'm surprised the offense wasn't rated even higher. To be honest, I know that's a tough pitcher's park. But they were only 7th in batting average and 8th in hits. So I'm surprised they weren't just even a little higher. I know, like you said, it's kind of a power-heavy lineup, so that batting average won't be as high. But thought they might be a little higher in slugging. Actually, they're still third. That's pretty ridiculous, especially with my and Coors ballparks helping us out quite a bit and being top 3 in that too. So really are as good as anybody at pretty much everything. So really scary team that's going to be really tough out in the playoffs. That's for sure. Next up,
Yeah,
we have. Oh,
honestly,
sorry. Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. No, I was just gonna say, honestly, Green and McAfee are both, additions this year. So, those are two pretty monster bats in that lineup that they acquired, around the deadline. And then Torkelson missed time too. So I think it's even a better offense than those numbers would show for the season.
Yeah, totally agree there. I kind of hadn't thought about that. It's a good point. Like 2 of their best hitters getting added, like you said, one of their best missing seasons. That's 3 really top-notch guys. So you're probably right for sure there. I think if those 3 guys are all healthy all year and next year probably, I think you'd see that offense finish even higher. So that's probably what it was. Good point there. So next up we have Colorado Rockies. Rockies had 97 wins, took the West, which was just the West has been full of demons year after year. This division is insane. One of the best runs I've ever seen for a division. The NL East was almost as tough for like 6 straight years. It was like that too in my division. But the West, the last years, has just been like a even more of a monster. So top heavy. All those top teams are just so good. What do you think about Colorado's team? This team scares the crap out of me almost as much as St. Louis, maybe just as much so.
Yeah, no, and they fit their park so well too. I mean, the offense, I think we touched on in the preseason, but that outfield is so insanely fun. Um, with Pash, Thomas, Veen, Sandro Fabian, all those guys can just hit the ball, and then you have Matt Olson and Kate Dowdy. So, it fits what they do in Colorado so well, which is just let the ball fly, and those guys hit the ball all over the place. And on the pitching side, the numbers get crazy inflated for playing there, but they do lead the NL in pitching WAR. Kyle Wright is a monster for them and one of the best pitchers in the playoffs for sure. The bullpen can get a little sketchy on them. That's maybe the only thing. Um, but outside of that, it's such a good team. Like you said, that division was a battle. Even Arizona who falls back late. Those 3 top teams were together the whole season. But it's a scary lineup to go up against, especially when they're playing at home.
Yeah, that it's hilarious looking at some of these, like you said, with the WAR ratings, first in pitcher WAR, but they're not above like 6 in anything really, except for walks and just. But crazy. You got a pitcher here that has 3 WAR with a 6.1 ERA in Sean Parton. So just those stats are so weird, but you can just tell by the ratings how good they are. Like all you see there is green and blue in the pitcher under stuff and movement. Just ridiculous talent. That outfield is about as good as you could possibly put together. They got like 6 guys there. Even their last guy, like I love this dude, this Ostos guy. Just a nice little role player there, guys. 75 stealings, 70 white case, 70 range, but just loaded at every single position. Them versus St. Louis would just be. I don't know if they're going to match up at any point in this playoffs, but that would just be so many freak athletes there. It'd be so cool to see. There's just star power out the yin yang. Absolutely incredible ball club they built up there, and they're just going to be such a tough out. Just the same thing we said. Pretty much every team in this playoffs is good. It's a tough out for anybody, but this team is really hard to beat. A team with this good of pitching. If you have, you have Susak and Wright and some of those guys, so that's a scary team for sure. And I'll mention Catlin here, one of my favorite young relievers in baseball. This guy struck out 42% of guys. So you have some really top-notch guys at the end of the bullpen there that can hopefully hold it down for them. Even if, like you said, those middle relievers weren't quite as good this year. It's really hard to tell sometimes with Coors, though, for sure. That's such a nice team. Next up, we have the wild card. So Pittsburgh gets in with 97 wins, not quite as good as St. Louis this year. They're pretty close with them in a few points this year. St. Louis just pulled ahead after the trade deadline, though. Pittsburgh's a really, really good team at 97 wins. Their team has been quite a bit changed from last year, though. They lost Abreu, and Bieber was injured for a lot of the year, so their pitching staff looks a little different. Their position players are pretty similar. They picked up a big addition, E.P. Reese, and Alex Bregman this year. So the team looks quite a bit different than some of those playoff teams they've had the last few years. But still their traditional Pittsburgh teams, which is pretty really good pitching, high batting averages, a little bit lower in power, kind of similar formula they've had in the last few years. And they've been good enough to win the World Series a couple times. They just haven't quite been able to get it done yet. But definitely a team that has a chance for sure. What do you think about their chances this year as a wild card team?
Yeah, no, like you mentioned, it's a different look. The whole top of that lineup, Reese, Bregman, even Cesar Ramirez is probably up for Rookie of the Year is new too, and he was really good for them. Offensively they're so weird. They don't hit home runs and they don't steal bases, but they just all hit for average. So there's really no break in the lineup. Pete Crow Armstrong might be the only one, but he's a defender they desperately need. So everyone just hits the ball so well up and down the lineup that it's scary, especially if you're not a great defensive team, to go up against a team that puts the ball in play like that. But like you said, the pitching was so strong for them, and Lacey takes a little bit of a step back this year. Flaherty's pretty right in line with his numbers, maybe not quite as good as we're used to, but Bieber's really the important one, especially him being healthy. Assuming Napolitano's in the rotation as well, you need him to pitch better than he did down the stretch this year. So still a good team, still a team that can find a way to win some close games, and they'll be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, that's crazy of the hits there. I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't realized quite how many hits they had. Finished with over 1,500 hits, second in the league behind Colorado. Pretty impressive. Traditionally, less of a contact team in the past. They've been heavy pitching and lighter on offense. So that's a tough team to hold to less than 8 or 9 hits per game. That's if you sort by contact potential, contact currents. They got like 9 guys here at 55 or better. So a lot, like you said, a lot of plus hit tools. That makes it tough unless you have a ton of stuff and reduce contact quite a bit there. So that's a nice built team. That's a well put together team that kind of is strong in every area except for the home runs, like you mentioned. 14th in home runs. That's crazy. So next up we have the San Francisco Giants, who are right behind Pittsburgh, 1 win behind at 96 wins. This team made the World Series last year. And I'm looking at let's look at their history here. I think last year, I'm just checking how many games they won in the regular season. Last year they won 101, and then this year they won 96. So not quite as many, but that doesn't really matter. It's more just the division being tough. That was they did lose Hudson Potts there for a while at the start of the season, and then the whole year they were pretty much in second or third place. I don't actually they were even in first for a while. The whole merry-go-round in the NL West there. Late in the year they fell off a little bit, and then they passed Arizona in that last month there to finish second. Look at their stats here, just a killer pitching rotation. First in a lot of categories here. Best defense in baseball. Had more zone rating than even Boston in the AL there. 47 is just a crazy number. And first in errors and defensive efficiency against. So just amazing, amazing pitching staff and defense. That's a really, really, really hard team to score runs against. Do you think they're right up there with St. Louis and Colorado? I think for sure. What would you say about that squad?
Yeah, they would. This team would scare the crap out of me if I had to play in the playoffs. I think they're up with St. Louis and definitely Colorado, and Atlanta too is one of the best teams. I know we've mentioned almost all of them, but they're the offense definitely underperformed this season, and you mentioned there were a good number of injuries. But you look up and down the lineup, and they're all really good bats. It would scare me to death with how good the pitching is. The top two of Tang and Gaston was great this season. Rutledge took a little bit of a step back from an insane last year, but he's still really good. If they get a good Dustin May, which looks like they were getting once he came over, he's a really strong four, and then obviously Hader's a monster in the pen. So, with the high level of defense and an offense that I think is way better than they played this season, not a team I would want to face in the first round of the playoffs at all.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gaston there. That's a guy I haven't focused on a lot. That guy is amazing. Gaston stayed
Mm-hmm.
healthy this whole season and just slayed out there with 6 WAR. Led the league in hits against per nine as a starting pitcher with only 6. So just an incredible arm there. That guy as good as anybody. He's right up there in that level with Wright and those guys and Susac and some of those Atlanta guys. Just a monster arm there with huge explosive strikeout numbers and stuff. So really nice squad there for sure. Next up, we have Arizona, another NL West team here. Arizona finished third in the wild card. That's the second wild card from the NL West. The 3 playoff teams again for them. This Arizona team has some crazy star power at the top. They don't quite have as much balance throughout the lineup as some of those other teams we talked about, especially on the pitching side of things. But the star power they have at the top with a couple of those bats and having Barriera and having the stud out of the park star Austin Hedges, this squad has a lot of talent at the top there who can carry them quite a bit. Right to 89 wins. They limped in the playoffs there, just above me, 5-17 in September, which is definitely concerning. But it doesn't really matter as long as they're healthy. It's still a 90-win team. You think they match up pretty well with some of those other NL teams with all those stars at the top?
Yeah, no, like you mentioned, definitely limped in, so that's a little bit scary. The lineup, 22 stolen bases for a season is hysterical to me. I don't
That's
even
it?
know. Yeah,
What?
22 for the whole season for
Holy
them.
shit.
I looked at that, I had to double take because that is such an insanely low number. But they hit for power, 204th in the NL, 242 home runs. The top four in that order of Napier, Trout, Jordan, and Leduc is really good. So you do get a little bit of a break in the lineup past that. The bottom half isn't quite as strong. But like you mentioned, it'll be interesting to see how they end up using Barriera in this first round if they let him go, game one and a potential game five as well, or they just use him as a bullpen weapon because the starting pitching was not good at all this season. They do acquire Sean Poppin, who's really nice once he comes over. So he's a good top of a guy who kind of changed that a little bit for them, but um, the starting pitching just doesn't quite match up. If Barrier is there, it's definitely as good with that top two. But if he's in the pen, you gotta have to rely on that lineup to get you some runs early, and hopefully Barrier can shut down some games. So it'll be interesting. A lot of talent in these NL playoffs. We touched a lot of teams that are playing in this first round that are really good too. So if they end up matching up with Colorado, that'll be a tough series on their pitching for sure. But it's still a good team, and obviously always good to make it into the postseason.
Yeah, that's gonna be. Yeah, you're right. That's not a good matchup from that Colorado. That's a lot of in Pittsburgh too. I'd say those heavy hit tool teams is tough when you have not quite as good of pitching as some of those other top teams. But you still got, if you can get Poppin and Barriera to get a couple starts there each in the 7-game series, 5-game series, you can definitely still have a really good shot there. Poppin, Barriera is the biggest question mark I'd say of anyone. I think Gamma mentioned in the chat at one point he might start him. So he had one dominant start at the end of the year with 16 Ks. So that'd be really interesting to see how he performs. I think that'll be the number one thing I'll look out for and when we see him here is how he performs, whether he's in the pen or starting. Just an incredible season he had. We'll talk about him quite a bit in the next episode of the awards. So that should be it for this playoff preview. I think we went over all the teams in the AL and NL that made it. Some just awesome pitching staffs. I think that's the thing that jumps out to me the most. Obviously, good at everything. Like, you're not a playoff team if you're not solid at hitting too. There is clearly some awesome hitting, especially at Colorado and Boston, and some of those teams are just Houston. They're just incredible with the bats. But it really, to me, is just the pitching. The amount of star pitchers in this playoffs is just crazy. Every single team has one. There's not a single team that doesn't have, like, you get Bruno in Los Angeles, and you get Maxwell in Houston, and you get those crazy guys in Oakland, obviously, and Boston and Baltimore all have like 3 aces each, and then you get what's his name there in Cleveland. I love Billings, and then the
Hmm.
Braves have all those stars. St. Louis has like three really 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 good pitchers, and then Pittsburgh obviously has like Beaver and all those guys. Just and then you get the Rockies having Susac and Wright, Giants having Gaston, and those guys you mentioned Tang, and then Arizona obviously having Barriera and Poppin. Just every single team just has aces, so it's going to be so cool to see these matchups with all this good pitching and see which offenses can show up against the elite pitchers. That should be it for this episode. Thanks for joining me, Tyler. That should be it. Any parting thoughts?
No, I'm glad you didn't make me give any predictions so I could be any more wrong than my preseason. But it's gonna be very fun for sure.
All right, cheers, everybody. Have fun in the playoffs.